Do you want to get your first Nordic curl? I'll show you how I went from this to this in less than 6 months, plus I'll give you the exact program I did to get there. Not only that, we'll go through why the Nordic curl is such a great exercise that everybody should be doing. First up, the anatomy. Nordic curls primarily train the hamstring through the movement of knee flexion. The hamstrings are a group of muscles at the back of your leg comprised of the biceps femoris, the semimembranosus, and the semitendinosus. The two semis and the long head of the biceps femoris cross both the hip and the knee, so that means they will be involved in both hip extension and knee flexion. However, the short head of the biceps femoris does not cross the hip, only the knee, so that means we need to train hip flexion as well as hip extension if we want total hamstring development. If you were wondering, according to EMG measurements of the hamstrings, knee flexion will give more activation in the hamstrings than hip extension. If you think about it, this kind of makes sense because with hip extension, you have large and powerful muscles, namely the glutes, to help you move the load. Whereas when we're doing knee flexion, all we have is really the gastrocnemius, which is a weak knee flexor at best. So the hamstrings are forced to do most of the work. So now if we look at the Nordic curl, we can see that the hamstrings are working at both ends. They're contracting isometrically at the hip end to keep the hips fixed, and then at the knee end, they're contracting isotonically to create and control the movement. Beyond hip extension and knee flexion, one of the main jobs of the hamstrings is to counteract all the force that your quadriceps are creating on the other side. They are particularly important in deceleration when you're running, and if your hamstrings aren't strong enough for this task, you are setting yourself up for injury. Hamstring strains are one of the most common injuries in sports, accounting for up to 24% of all injuries. So given that, it might seem obvious that strengthening your hamstrings will help reduce your injury risk, and that's exactly what it does. But what is particularly important is the eccentric strength of the hamstrings, and that just refers to the ability of the hamstrings to contract as they lengthen. In this case, to decelerate the movement the quads have created. The perfect exercise to develop both concentric and eccentric strength in the hamstrings is the Nordic curl. But the best thing about the Nordic curl is its effect on injury prevention. A 2016 review of the impact of the Nordic curl on injury prevention showed that across all studies included, teams with programs that included the Nordic curl reduced hamstring injury rates of up to 51%. So now hopefully you can see that you should be doing the Nordic curl. So let's talk about how we actually do it. Firstly, we need to find somewhere to even do Nordic curls, and there are a lot of options as to where you can do it. Just search on YouTube and you will come up with something. And just quickly, you will always get advertised these things. I don't really recommend these for a couple of reasons, because they're meant to go underneath your door and the other end you hook your feet under. For one thing, it can damage your door. For another, this sometimes is too small for your door and it slips right out. And then the other thing is, because this end is in theory fixed, the other end's free to move, so it kind of changes where you're actually pushing against. I feel it's better if you have your feet fixed under something rigid. My favorite way to do the Nordic curl is to just use a lifting belt. Even if you don't have one, they're relatively inexpensive and you can secure your legs as tight as you need to. It's super easy to set up. All you do, slide the belt over the edge of the bench, slide your feet in, and then you're set up to do your Nordic curl, tighten it as needed. So now onto the technique. So here's how to get your first Nordic curl. Securely attach your feet, lower your upper body down to the floor and come back up. That's it. The exercise is simple, but it's extremely hard to do. So how are we going to progress to get our first one? The Nordic curl falls into a category of exercises that gets harder the deeper you go into it. In this case, it's because as we lower down, the torque at the knee joint is increasing. So we have two options to make it easier. We can either restrict the range of motion or use some kind of assistance. Restricting the range of motion is quite simple to do. All you do is put something in front of you that's about the point where you're going to fail. And then at that point, you lightly touch your upper body to the object and then come back up. Over time, the object in front of you should get smaller and smaller as you get closer to the floor. And the other way is to use assistance. And one common way of doing this is to control your descent as much as you can. And then from the bottom, you kind of do a push-up to create a bit of momentum, and then you finish it off with your hamstring strength. The problem with this method is that you can't really measure it. You can never tell how much you actually pushed into the ground. In my opinion, the only exercise you need to get your first Nordic curl is a resistance band assisted Nordic curl, because doing it with resistance bands has a few benefits over all the other ways. First is that the band will offer accommodating resistance, which means the lower you get into the Nordic curl, the more the band is going to help you. And remember, the Nordic curl gets harder the deeper we go into it, so it kind of matches up perfectly. And then over time, just reduce the size of the band, and then you'll get closer to your Nordic curl. This is literally the only exercise that I did to get my first Nordic curl, because there's no reason to do any other one. If you spend your time and energy strategy working on this exercise. Over time, you'll get better at this exercise and eventually you'll get your Nordic curl. There's no reason to do another exercise. Like I said, the exact program I did to get my first one is linked below. Good luck on the journey to get your first Nordic curl. If you do, please tag me in it. I would love to see it. I hope you learned something throughout the video, and if you did, please like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. Or not, I'm not your boss.